The dust hung thick in the air as Willa Zimmerman watched the banker's men nail a foreclosure notice to the door of the only home her 3 children had ever known. And she felt something harder than fear settle in her chest, something that tasted like iron and resolve. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Telluride, Colorado in the summer of 1882, turning the main street into a ribbon of shimmering heat that made even the mountains in the distance seem to waver like a mirage. Her eldest, 7-year-old Thomas, stood beside her with his small jaw clenched, trying so hard to be brave that it broke her heart. Little Margaret, just 5, clutched at her worn skirt with one hand while sucking her thumb with the other, and baby James, barely 2 years old, squirmed in her arms, too young to understand that everything was falling apart. "You have until sunset tomorrow to vacate the premises, Mrs. Zimmerman," the banker's clerk said, his voice flat and devoid of sympathy. He was a thin man with a narrow face and eyes that refused to meet hers. "I am sorry for your troubles, but the bank has been more than patient. Your husband's debts must be satisfied." Willa wanted to scream at him that her husband had been dead for 8 months, that the mine collapse that killed Robert had also killed any chance she had of paying off the loans he had taken out to buy equipment, that she had been working her fingers raw taking in laundry and mending just to put food on the table. But she knew it would do no good. The bank did not care about widows or orphans. The bank only cared about money, and she had none. "I understand," she said instead, her voice steady despite the terror churning in her stomach. "We will be gone by tomorrow." The clerk nodded curtly and walked away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The 2 men who had accompanied him followed, leaving Willa standing in front of her home with nowhere to go and 3 children depending on her. She had no family in Colorado, no relatives who could take them in. Her parents had died years ago back in Missouri, and Robert's family had disowned him when he decided to head west to make his fortune. Some fortune, she thought bitterly. All he had left her was debt and 3 hungry mouths to feed. "Mama, where are we going to live?" Thomas asked, his voice small and frightened despite his brave face. Willa set James down and knelt in the dirt so she could look her son in the eye. "I do not know yet, sweetheart, but I promise you I will figure something out. We are going to be all right." It was a lie, and she suspected Thomas knew it, but he nodded anyway. Margaret started to cry, and Willa gathered both older children into her arms while James toddled around them, oblivious to the crisis unfolding around him. She held them for a long moment, drawing strength from their small, warm bodies, and then she stood up and brushed the dust from her skirt. "Come on," she said. "Let us go inside and start packing. We need to take only what we can carry." The inside of the house was small and cramped, just 3 rooms that had somehow held all their hopes and dreams. Willa moved through it methodically, sorting through their meager possessions and deciding what was essential. Clothes, a few blankets, Robert's old rifle that she barely knew how to use, a small pot for cooking, tin cups and plates. Everything else would have to stay behind. She packed it all into 2 canvas bags and a worn carpet bag that had belonged to her mother. And then she sat down at the rickety kitchen table and tried to think. She had exactly $4.37 to her name. It was not enough to rent even the shabbiest room in town, not enough to buy stage tickets to anywhere that might offer better prospects. She could maybe afford food for a few days if she was careful, but after that, they would be destitute. The thought of her children going hungry made her feel physically sick. That night, she fed them the last of the beans and cornbread in the house and tucked them into bed, singing them the same lullaby she always sang. Thomas fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the stress of the day, and Margaret drifted off with her thumb in her mouth. But James fought sleep as toddlers do, fussing and squirming until finally his eyes closed and his breathing evened out. Willa sat in the darkness and stared at their sleeping faces, and for the first time since Robert died, she allowed herself to cry. She woke before dawn to the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere down the street. Her eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, but there was no time to rest. She got the children up and dressed, fed them the last of the bread with a scraping of butter, and then shouldered the bags. Thomas carried the smaller canvas bag without complaint, and Willa carried James on her hip while Margaret held tight to her free hand. They walked out of the house just as the sun was beginning to paint the sky pink and gold, and Willa did not look back. The streets of Telluride were just beginning to wake up as they made their way toward the center of town. A few early risers were already out, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops and workers heading toward the mines that honeycombed the mountains surrounding the valley. Willa had no real plan beyond finding somewhere to sit and think, maybe ask around to see if anyone needed help, though she knew the chances were slim. The mining town was full of desperate people looking for work. They ended up in front of the general store, where there was a wooden bench under an awning that provided some shade. Willa set James down and let him toddle around while she tried to figure out their next move. Margaret sat close beside her, unusually quiet, and Thomas stood nearby, his eyes darting around nervously as if he expected someone to come and chase them away. "Can I help you folks?" Willa looked up to see a tall man standing a few feet away, his hat tilted back on his head. He was dressed like a ranch hand, with worn leather chaps over his trousers and dusty boots that had seen plenty of hard use. His face was weathered and tanned from long hours in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he was somewhere in his early 30s. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were a startling shade of blue-green, like the mountain lakes she had seen when they first arrived in Colorado. "We are fine, thank you," Willa said automatically, though it was obvious they were anything but fine. The man studied them for a moment, taking in the bags, the exhausted woman, the 3 small children. His expression was thoughtful rather than judgmental. "You look like you have been traveling. Are you waiting for someone?" Willa hesitated, pride warring with desperation. "We are just resting," she said finally. The man nodded slowly. "I see. Well, if you need anything, the general store is a good place to be. Mrs. Henderson, who runs it, is a kind woman." He tipped his hat and started to turn away, but then Thomas spoke up. "We got evicted," the boy said, his voice defiant. "We do not have anywhere to go." "Thomas," Willa said sharply, but the damage was done. The man turned back, his expression shifting to one of concern. "Is that so?" He looked at Willa, and she felt her cheeks burn with shame. "My husband died in a mine collapse last winter," she said, lifting her chin. "The bank foreclosed on our home. We were just leaving. Leaving to go where? I have not decided yet." The man was quiet for a moment, and Willa could see him thinking. Finally, he said, "My name is Xavier Easton. I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of here, up in the valley. It is a fair-sized spread, good grazing land, plenty of water from the mountain runoff." "That is very nice for you," Willa said, not sure where this was going. "The thing is," Xavier continued, "it is just me out there. My parents started the ranch 20 years ago, but my father passed 2 years back and my mother followed him 6 months later. I have been running it alone since then, and while I manage well enough with the cattle and the land, it is a lonely life. The ranch house is big and empty, and sometimes I think about how my mother always said a ranch needs a family to make it a home." Willa stared at him, not daring to hope. "Mr. Easton, I am not sure what you are suggesting." Xavier met her eyes directly. "I am suggesting that you and your children come out to the ranch. I have more space than I know what to do with, and I could use help with the cooking and the household chores. My own cooking is terrible, and the house has not had a proper cleaning in months. In exchange, you would have a roof over your heads, food to eat, and safety. Your children would have room to grow and play. You are offering us charity, Willa said, her voice stiff. I am offering you work, Xavier corrected. There is a difference. I need help, you need a home. It seems like a fair arrangement to me. Willa wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to grab this lifeline with both hands, but years of hard living had made her cautious. Why would you do this for strangers? You do not know anything about us. Xavier shrugged. I know you are a mother trying to protect her children. I know you are willing to work hard, because I have seen you around town with your laundry baskets. Mrs. Henderson mentioned once that you did beautiful mending work, and I know what it is like to lose family. He paused, and something painful flickered across his face. My fiancé died of fever 3 years ago, right before we were supposed to be married. I understand loss. The sincerity in his voice convinced her more than any argument could have. Willa looked at her children, at Thomas trying so hard to be brave, at Margaret with her tired, frightened eyes, at little James who deserved better than to grow up hungry and homeless. Then she looked back at Xavier Easton, at his honest face and steady gaze. If we come to your ranch, it will be as employees, she said firmly. I will not accept charity, Mr. Easton. I will work for our keep, and if at any point you are unsatisfied with the arrangement, you need only say so and we will leave. That seems fair, Xavier agreed. Though I should warn you, the ranch is isolated. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and town is a 2-hour ride. It can be hard, especially in winter. We will manage, Willa said. We are no strangers to hard work. Xavier smiled then, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less careworn. Good. I have my wagon over at the livery. Give me 20 minutes to load up the supplies I came to town for, and then we can head out. He walked away before Willa could change her mind, leaving her sitting on the bench with her heart pounding. Thomas looked up at her with wide eyes. Mama, are we really going to live on a ranch? It seems so, Willa said, still trying to process what had just happened. Do you think you would like that? Will there be horses? Thomas asked, his face lighting up. I imagine there will be, Willa said, smiling despite herself. And cows, too. I like cows, Margaret announced solemnly. They are soft. Willa laughed and pulled her daughter close. Maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right after all. True to his word, Xavier returned 20 minutes later with a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 strong horses. He helped Willa and the children climb up onto the bench seat, loaded their meager bags into the back alongside sacks of flour and sugar and other supplies, and then climbed up himself and took the reins. Ready? He asked. Ready, Willa confirmed, and they set off. The road north out of Telluride was rough and winding, climbing up through groves of aspen and pine. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, and Willa was grateful for the breeze that stirred her hair and dried the sweat on her brow. Thomas sat between her and Xavier, peppering the rancher with questions about the ranch and the animals, and Xavier answered each one with patience and good humor. Margaret dozed against Willa's side, and James sat on her lap, fascinated by the horses and the scenery. As they drove, Xavier told them about the ranch. It was called the Lazy E, named by his father, who had a sense of humor about such things. They ran about 200 head of cattle, mostly Herefords, and had a small remuda of working horses. There was a main house, a barn, a bunkhouse that was currently empty, and various outbuildings. A creek ran through the property, fed by snowmelt from the peaks, and there were meadows full of wildflowers in the summer. It sounds beautiful, Willa said wistfully. It is, Xavier agreed. Though it is also a lot of work. There is always something that needs fixing or tending to, but it is good work, honest work, the kind that lets you sleep well at night. Willa understood that. She had not slept well in months, not since Robert died and the debts started piling up. Maybe at the ranch she would finally be able to rest. They crested a ridge, and suddenly the valley opened up before them, a broad expanse of green meadows dotted with grazing cattle. In the center of it all sat a two-story house built of logs, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Smoke curled up from the chimney, which struck Willa as odd until Xavier explained that he had left a fire banked in the stove before he left for town that morning. "Welcome to the Lazy E," he said. The house was even bigger than it had looked from a distance. Xavier helped them down from the wagon and led them inside, and Willa tried not to gape at the spacious rooms and high ceilings. The main floor had a large kitchen with a cast iron stove and a pump right inside the house, a dining room with a long table that could seat a dozen people, and a parlor with comfortable furniture and bookshelves lining one wall. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms, each one bigger than the entire house she had just been evicted from. "You and the children can take these 3 rooms," Xavier said, gesturing to the bedrooms at one end of the hallway. "I use the one at the other end. There is a washroom up here too, though you will have to carry water up from the kitchen." "This is too much," Willa said faintly. "Mr. Easton, we cannot possibly—" "You can, and you will," Xavier said firmly. "These rooms have been sitting empty for 2 years. It will be good to have them used again. Now, let me help you get settled, and then I will show you around the property." He carried their bags upstairs and left them to unpack while he went to tend to the horses. Willa stood in the middle of the largest bedroom, the one she would be using, and tried to comprehend how her life had changed so dramatically in the space of a few hours. This morning, she had been homeless and desperate. Now, she was standing in a beautiful house with a job and a future, however uncertain it might be. "Mama, come see my room," Thomas called, and she went to admire the space he would be sharing with James. Margaret had her own small room next door, and she was already arranging her few belongings with great seriousness. They spent the rest of the day exploring the ranch. Xavier showed them the barn, where they met the horses and the milk cow. He introduced them to the chickens and pointed out where the vegetable garden was, though it was currently overgrown with weeds. Thomas was in heaven, running from one thing to another with boundless energy, and even shy Margaret seemed enchanted by the baby chicks pecking around the yard. That evening, Willa cooked dinner in the enormous kitchen, making use of the supplies Xavier had bought in town. It was just a simple meal of fried chicken, biscuits, and green beans, but Xavier ate like it was a feast. "I have not had a home-cooked meal this good in 2 years," he said, reaching for a third biscuit. "Mrs. Zimmerman, if you cook like this every day, I will consider myself the luckiest man in Colorado." Willa felt herself blush. "It is nothing special, Mr. Easton, just plain cooking." "It is special to me," he insisted. "And please call me Xavier. Mr. Easton makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and tie." "Then you must call me Willa," she said, surprising herself with the offer. It seemed too familiar, too friendly, but then again they were going to be living under the same roof. Formality would be difficult to maintain. "Willa it is," Xavier agreed, smiling at her. After dinner, Willa washed the dishes while Xavier played with the children in the parlor. She could hear him teaching Thomas how to play checkers and making Margaret giggle with silly stories. It should have felt strange, having this man in their lives, but somehow it did not. Instead, it felt almost natural, as if they had known him much longer than a single day. That night, as she tucked the children into their new beds, Thomas looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mama, is Mr. Easton going to be our new papa? Willa felt her heart skip a beat. "No, sweetheart, he is our employer. He was kind enough to give us a home, but that does not make him your papa." "But I like him," Thomas said, "and Papa has been gone a long time." "I know, baby," Willa said softly, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "I like him too, but let us not get ahead of ourselves. We are very lucky to be here, and we need to work hard to earn our place. Do you understand?" Thomas nodded, though he still looked thoughtful. Willa kissed his forehead and went to check on Margaret and James, both of whom were already fast asleep. Then she retreated to her own room and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened. Xavier Easton was a good man, that much was clear. He was kind and patient with the children, respectful to her, and generous beyond reason. But Willa had learned through bitter experience that nothing in life came without a price. She would work herself to the bone if necessary to prove that she was worth the risk he had taken on her family. She would not give him any reason to regret his decision. The days that followed quickly fell into a rhythm. Willa rose before dawn to start breakfast, cooking hearty meals to fuel Xavier through his long days of ranch work. After he headed out to check on the cattle or mend fences or whatever other task needed doing, she would tackle the house. She scrubbed floors and washed windows, beat rugs and aired out bedding, organized the pantry and mended the curtains. The house had been neglected for so long that there was endless work to do, but Willa did not mind. It felt good to be useful, to have purpose again. Thomas appointed himself Xavier's shadow whenever possible, trailing after the rancher and bombarding him with questions. Xavier bore it with good grace, and Willa often saw him teaching her son how to properly care for the horses or showing him how to check the cattle for signs of illness. Margaret was shyer, but she could often be found in the barn playing with the kittens that lived in the hayloft, and little James was content to toddle around the yard, chasing chickens and collecting rocks. In the evenings, they would all gather for dinner, and afterward Xavier would read to the children from the books on his shelves. He had a nice voice for reading, deep and steady, and Willa found herself looking forward to these quiet times as much as the children did. Sometimes, after the children were in bed, she and Xavier would sit on the porch and talk, sharing stories about their pasts and their hopes for the future. She learned that he had grown up on the ranch, that he had always planned to expand the herd and maybe breed horses someday. He learned that she had been a teacher back in Missouri before she married Robert, that she loved to read and missed having access to books. The next time Xavier went to town, he came back with a stack of novels for her, and Willa nearly cried at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. As summer deepened into August, Willa began to feel something she had not felt in a long time: contentment. The children were thriving in the mountain air, growing brown and strong from running around the ranch all day. Thomas was learning to ride one of the gentler horses, and Margaret had overcome her shyness enough to chatter away to Xavier about anything and everything. Even baby James seemed happier, his laughter ringing out across the yard as he played. And Willa herself, though she worked harder than she ever had in her life, felt more alive than she had since before Robert died. Part of it was the satisfaction of honest work, of knowing she was earning her place. But part of it, if she was honest with herself, was Xavier. She had started to notice little things about him. The way he always made sure she sat down to rest when he came in for lunch. The way he never raised his voice, even when one of the children was being difficult. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression that made her pulse quicken. She told herself not to be foolish. Xavier had offered them charity disguised as employment, nothing more. He was a good man helping out a family in need. The fact that she found him attractive, that she enjoyed his company, that she sometimes caught herself watching him as he worked outside with his shirt sleeves rolled up, meant nothing. She was a widow with 3 children and nothing to offer a man like him. But then came the day in late August when everything changed. Willa was in the kitchen making bread when she heard shouting from outside. She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to the door, her heart pounding. Thomas and Margaret were supposed to be playing near the barn, but she could not see them. Xavier was running toward the creek, moving faster than she had ever seen him move. Without thinking, Willa ran after him, fear clawing at her throat. She reached the creek bank and saw Xavier wading into the water, which was running high and fast from the late summer rains. Thomas was standing on the bank, sobbing, and Margaret was nowhere to be seen. Then Willa saw her, a flash of blue dress in the rushing water, already 20 feet downstream and being carried away by the current. "Margaret!" she screamed, and started to run along the bank, but Xavier was faster. He dove into the water and swam with powerful strokes, cutting across the current to intercept her daughter. Willa watched in terror as he reached Margaret and grabbed her, pulling her head above water. But the current was strong, and even Xavier was struggling against it. Willa ran downstream, desperate to help but not knowing how. Thomas had caught up to her, still crying, and she grabbed his hand as they raced along the bank. Up ahead, she could see where the creek widened and slowed, and she prayed Xavier could hold on until they reached that point. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before Xavier finally managed to drag himself and Margaret to the bank in the calmer water. Willa crashed through the bushes and dropped to her knees beside them. Margaret was coughing and crying, but she was alive. Xavier was gasping for breath, his chest heaving, but he was already checking Margaret over, making sure she was all right. "Is she hurt?" Willa demanded, her hands shaking as she reached for her daughter. "I do not think so," Xavier said, his voice rough. "Just scared and cold." Willa gathered Margaret into her arms, holding her so tightly that the little girl squeaked in protest. "What happened? How did you fall in?" "I was trying to catch a frog," Margaret sobbed. "I slipped on the rocks." "You could have died," Willa said, her voice breaking. "Oh, baby, you could have died." "But she did not," Xavier said gently. He stood up, water streaming from his clothes, and offered Willa a hand. "Come on, let us get her back to the house and into dry clothes." The walk back seemed to take forever. Willa carried Margaret while Xavier carried James, who had wandered down from the house to see what all the commotion was about. Thomas walked beside them, subdued and frightened by what had happened. At the house, Willa stripped Margaret out of her wet clothes and wrapped her in blankets, then made her sit by the stove to warm up. Xavier disappeared upstairs to change his own clothes, and when he came back down, his hair was still damp and sticking up in all directions. "Is she all right?" he asked quietly. "She will be fine, thanks to you," Willa said. Her hands were still shaking, and she realized she was close to tears. "If you had not been there, if you had not been fast enough." "But I was," Xavier said. He crossed the kitchen and put his hands on her shoulders, looking down at her with those steady blue-green eyes. "Willa, she is safe. That is all that matters." "You saved her life," Willa whispered. "How can I ever thank you for that?" "You do not need to thank me," Xavier said. "Those children, they are." He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "They are part of my life now. I care about them. I care about all of you." There was something in his voice that made Willa look up at him sharply. The way he was looking at her, the intensity in his gaze, sent a flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with fear. "Xavier," she said softly, not even sure what she was trying to say. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then Margaret called out, "Mama, I am cold," and the moment passed. Xavier dropped his hands and stepped back, and Willa turned away to tend to her daughter, her heart racing. That night, after the children were in bed, Willa found Xavier sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the darkening mountains. She hesitated in the doorway, then made herself walk outside and sit down beside him. "Thank you again," she said quietly, "for saving Margaret." "You do not need to keep thanking me," Xavier said, but his voice was gentle. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Willa said, "Thomas asked me something a few weeks ago. He asked if you were going to be their new papa." Xavier went very still. "What did you tell him?" "I told him no. I told him you were our employer and we were lucky to have a place here." Willa took a breath. "But I am not sure that was the right answer." Xavier turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were dark and serious. What would have been the right answer? Willa's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I do not know," she admitted. "Xavier, I do not know what is happening between us. I do not know if I am imagining things or if you feel it too. But when I saw Margaret in the water today, when I thought I might lose her, all I could think was that I did not want to face that alone. I did not want to face anything alone." "You do not have to," Xavier said. His hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and strong. "Willa, I did not plan this. When I saw you in town that day, I just thought I could help. But these past 2 months, having you here, having the children here, it has changed everything. The house feels like a home again. I feel like I have a purpose again. And you are." He paused, squeezing her hand. "You are everything I did not know I was looking for." Willa felt tears prick her eyes. "I am a widow with 3 children and nothing to my name. I come with so much baggage, so many complications." "You come with a ready-made family," Xavier corrected. "And I happen to like that family very much, all of them." "It has only been 2 months," Willa said, but she was not pulling her hand away. "That is not very long." "It is long enough for me to know what I feel," Xavier said. "But if you need more time, I can wait. I am a patient man, Willa. I have waited this long to find you. I can wait as long as you need." Willa looked at him, at his honest face and steady eyes, and she thought about all the ways he had shown her who he was over the past 2 months. The patience he showed with the children, the respect he showed her. The way he had jumped into a dangerous creek without hesitation to save Margaret. The way he made her feel safe and valued and seen. "I do not think I need more time," she heard herself say. "I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day, and I have just been too scared to admit it." Xavier's breath caught. "Say that again." "I love you," Willa said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that thinking it never had. "I love you, Xavier Easton." He pulled her toward him and kissed her, and it was nothing like the kisses she remembered from her marriage to Robert. Those had been perfunctory, obligatory. This was something else entirely, something that made her feel like she was falling and flying at the same time. She kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past months, all the fear and hope and longing she had been carrying. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Xavier rested his forehead against hers and said, "Marry me." Willa laughed breathlessly. That was not much of a proposal. "Marry me," Xavier said again, pulling back so he could look her in the eyes. "I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not care about any of that. I want you to be my wife. I want Thomas and Margaret and James to be my children in all the ways that matter. I want us to be a real family." "Yes," Willa said, not letting herself overthink it. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier kissed her again, and this time it was softer, sweeter, full of promise. When they finally went inside, Willa felt like she was walking on air. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Telluride, with the children standing beside them and a handful of townspeople as witnesses. Willa wore a new dress that Xavier insisted on buying for her, a deep blue that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. Xavier wore a suit that he clearly was not used to, tugging at the collar throughout the ceremony, but he looked so handsome that Willa could barely concentrate on the preacher's words. Thomas was solemn and serious as he stood beside Xavier, clearly taking his role as witness very seriously. Margaret scattered wildflowers down the aisle with great concentration, and little James sat on Mrs. Henderson's lap and clapped at all the wrong moments, making everyone laugh. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Xavier kissed Willa in front of everyone, and the small crowd cheered. Willa felt her cheeks burn, but she was smiling so hard her face hurt. They had a small celebration at the hotel restaurant, with cake and lemonade for the children. Several people came up to congratulate them, including the banker who had foreclosed on Willa's house. He looked vaguely embarrassed, as if he realized the irony of the situation, but Willa just smiled at him graciously. She bore him no ill will. If he had not foreclosed, she never would have met Xavier. The ride back to the ranch felt different now. Willa was no longer an employee or a charity case. She was Xavier's wife, and the ranch was her home. The children were giddy with excitement, chattering about the wedding and the cake, and Xavier kept glancing over at Willa with a smile that made her stomach flutter. That night, after the children were finally asleep, exhausted from all the excitement, Willa stood in the bedroom she now shared with Xavier and felt suddenly nervous. She had been married before, had borne 3 children, but somehow this felt new and overwhelming. Xavier came in and closed the door behind him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then he crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I am nervous," Willa admitted. "I do not know why. It is silly." "It is not silly," Xavier said. "This is all new. We have time to figure it out together." He kissed her gently, and Willa relaxed into it, letting the love she felt for him wash away her nervousness. They had time, like he said. They had the rest of their lives. The autumn that followed was one of the happiest times of Willa's life. She threw herself into making the ranch truly feel like a home, preserving vegetables from the garden she had reclaimed from the weeds, putting up jams and pickles for the winter, sewing new curtains for the windows. Xavier taught Thomas to ride properly, and the boy could often be seen trotting around the property on the gentlest mare, grinning from ear to ear. Margaret helped Willa in the kitchen and the garden, chattering away about everything and nothing. James was growing like a weed, his vocabulary expanding daily as he tried to keep up with his older siblings. In October, Xavier hired 2 ranch hands to help with the cattle and the work around the property. They were brothers, Jack and Sam Morrison, good men who lived in the bunkhouse and took their meals with the family. Having them there eased Xavier's workload considerably, and it meant he had more time to spend with Willa and the children. One evening in November, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Xavier said, "I have been thinking about expanding the herd come spring, maybe building on to the barn as well. With Jack and Sam here to help, we could handle more cattle." "That sounds like a good plan," Willa said, looking up from the sock she was darning. "The ranch is doing well, is it not? Better than it has in years," Xavier said. He glanced at the children who were playing on the floor and then back at Willa. "I was also thinking, this house has 4 bedrooms. That is a lot of space for just the 5 of us." Willa felt her cheeks warm. They had been married for 2 months now, and while she was not yet certain, she suspected she might be pregnant. She had been waiting to be sure before she said anything, but it seemed Xavier had noticed the signs. "Are you saying you would not mind if our family grew?" she asked carefully. Xavier's face lit up. "Willa, are you?" "I think so," she said. "It is too early to be certain, but all the signs are there." Xavier crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her up into his arms, spinning her around. "That is the best news I have heard in years," he said, setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. "Another child, our child." "Are you sure you want this?" Willa asked, even though she could see the joy written all over his face. "You already took on 3 children when you married me, and I would take on a dozen more if it meant having you in my life," Xavier said firmly. "Willa, every one of these children is a blessing, the ones you brought with you and any others we might have together." Thomas looked up from where he was building a fort out of blocks with Margaret. "Are we getting a new baby?" he asked. "It seems like it," Willa said, smiling at him. "How would you feel about that?" Thomas considered this seriously. "I think it would be good. James needs someone else to play with. Margaret and I have each other." "That is very thoughtful of you," Xavier said, ruffling the boy's hair. The pregnancy was easier than Willa's previous ones had been, perhaps because she was not struggling to survive this time. She had good food to eat, a warm house to live in, and a husband who doted on her. Xavier was almost comically protective, constantly telling her to sit down and rest, not to lift anything heavy, to let him handle tasks she had been doing without problem. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she finally told him in exasperation one day in December when he tried to stop her from carrying a pot to the table. "I know," Xavier said sheepishly. "I just worry." "I know you do," Willa said, softening, "but I promise I will be careful. I have done this before, remember." Winter came early to the Colorado high country that year, with snow starting to fall in earnest in mid-November. By December, the world outside was a wonderland of white, and the children were delighted. Thomas and Margaret spent hours playing in the snow, building snowmen and having snowball fights, while James watched from the window, too small yet to really enjoy the cold. Christmas was a revelation. Xavier insisted on cutting down a tree and decorating it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that the children made. On Christmas morning, there were gifts for everyone, simple things but chosen with care. Xavier gave Thomas a real cowboy hat, sized just for him, and the boy wore it every waking moment for the next week. Margaret got a beautiful doll with a porcelain face, and she named it Emma and carried it everywhere. James got a wooden horse on wheels that he could ride around the house. For Willa, Xavier had bought books, 3 beautiful leather-bound volumes of poetry that must have cost a small fortune. She cried when she opened them, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "They are too much," she protested, but Xavier shook his head. "They are not enough," he said. "You gave up so much when you married me, leaving town behind, living out here in the middle of nowhere. The least I can do is make sure you have books to read." "I did not give up anything," Willa said firmly. "I gained everything." She gave Xavier a new pair of leather work gloves that she had sewn herself, and a scarf she had knitted in secret over the past month. They were simple gifts, but Xavier seemed genuinely touched. The winter months passed in a pleasant rhythm. The ranch work slowed during the coldest part of the year, which meant Xavier was around the house more. He taught Thomas to play chess and started teaching all 3 children their letters and numbers in the evenings. Willa was touched by how seriously he took his role as their father. He never referred to them as her children or his stepchildren. They were simply his children, and he loved them fiercely. In late February, Willa woke one morning to cramping pains low in her abdomen. She lay still for a moment, trying to decide if this was false labor or the real thing, and then another pain hit, stronger this time. Beside her, Xavier stirred and opened his eyes. "Willa, what is wrong?" "The baby is coming," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You need to go fetch the doctor from town." Xavier was out of bed in an instant, pulling on his clothes. "Will you be all right? Should I get Mrs. Morrison?" Sam Morrison was married, and his wife Sarah sometimes came out to the ranch to help with preserving or other big tasks. She lived in a small house about 3 miles away. "Yes, fetch Sarah," Willa agreed. "She has had children of her own. She will know what to do." Xavier was gone within minutes, riding hard for Sarah's house first and then continuing on to town for the doctor. Willa got up and woke Thomas, giving him instructions to watch his brother and sister and keep them downstairs. Then she retreated to her bedroom to wait. Sarah arrived within the hour, bringing with her a calm competence that Willa found deeply reassuring. She helped Willa change into a nightgown and got her settled in bed, then started boiling water and gathering clean linens. "How far apart are the pains?" she asked. "About 10 minutes, Willa said, gritting her teeth through another contraction. "Then we have some time yet," Sarah said. "First babies usually take a while, and even though this is not your first, it is your first with Xavier. These things can vary." The doctor arrived in the early afternoon, a gruff, older man named Dr. Patterson who had been practicing in Telluride for 20 years. He examined Willa and pronounced that everything was progressing normally. "It will be a few more hours yet," he told Xavier, who was hovering anxiously in the hallway. "Best thing you can do is stay out of the way and let the women handle this." Xavier looked like he wanted to argue, but Willa called out, "Go check on the children. Make sure they are not frightened." He went reluctantly, and Willa heard him talking to Thomas and Margaret downstairs, his voice calm and reassuring. She was hit by a wave of love for him so strong, it almost eclipsed the pain of the contractions. This good, kind man who had taken her and her children in and made them his family. The baby was born just as the sun was setting, a healthy boy with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair. Dr. Patterson cleaned him up and handed him to Willa, who cradled her newborn son against her chest and felt tears stream down her face. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is indeed," Dr. Patterson agreed. "Good strong lungs on him too. You did well, Mrs. Easton." Sarah helped her get cleaned up and settled, then went downstairs to tell Xavier he could come up. He took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the room, his eyes going immediately to Willa and the baby. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" he demanded. "We are both fine," Willa assured him. "Come meet your son." Xavier approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. His expression was one of awe and wonder. "Our son," he said softly. "Willa, he is beautiful. Do you want to hold him?" Willa asked. Xavier sat on the edge of the bed and very carefully took the baby from her. He held him like he was made of spun glass, supporting his head with one large, work-roughened hand. "Hello there, little man," he murmured. "I am your papa. I have been waiting to meet you." The baby blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, and Xavier laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "What should we name him?" Willa asked. They had discussed names over the winter but had not settled on anything definite. Xavier looked thoughtful. "What about Henry?" he suggested. "It was my grandfather's name, Henry Robert Easton. We can use your first husband's name as a middle name if you think that would be all right. The children should know where they came from." Willa felt fresh tears prick her eyes. That Xavier would think to honor Robert, the man who had come before him, spoke volumes about his character. "Henry Robert Easton," she repeated. "I think that is perfect." The children were allowed to come up one at a time to meet their new brother. Thomas was fascinated, wanting to know everything about babies and how they grew. Margaret was more cautious, peering at Henry with wide eyes before declaring him very small. James just wanted to poke him, and Willa had to gently redirect his chubby fingers. That night, after the doctor had gone back to town, and Sarah had returned home, after the children were all asleep in their beds, Willa lay with Henry in the cradle beside her, and Xavier stretched out next to her on the bed. They were both exhausted, but there was a contentment in the room that felt almost tangible. "Thank you," Xavier said quietly. "For what?" Willa asked. "For giving me this, a family, a son, a life I never thought I would have." He reached over and took her hand. "I know I say this all the time, but I love you, Willa, more than I knew it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Willa said. "And I am the one who should be thanking you. You saved us, Xavier. You gave us a home and a future when we had nothing." "You gave me purpose," Xavier said. "Before you came, I was just going through the motions. Now every day feels like a gift." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Henry's soft breathing. Then Xavier said, "Do you think you might want more? After Henry, I mean. More children?" Willa laughed softly. "Ask me again in a year when I am not still recovering from birthing this one. But yes, I think I might. This house does have a lot of bedrooms to fill." "That it does," Xavier agreed, smiling. Spring came late that year, with snow lingering in the high passes well into April. But when it finally arrived, it came with a rush of green growth and wildflowers, and new calves being born in the fields. Xavier expanded the herd as planned, buying 30 more head of cattle at market. The ranch was prospering, and with it, so was their family. Henry grew from a tiny infant into a plump, happy baby who smiled at everyone and seemed to find everything delightful. Thomas, now 8, was becoming quite skilled at riding and ranch work. Xavier let him help with moving cattle and checking fences, treating him like a real ranch hand, and the boy thrived on the responsibility. Margaret, at 6, was more interested in the domestic side of things, often found in the kitchen helping her mother or in the garden tending the vegetables. James, nearly 3, was a whirlwind of energy, constantly getting into mischief but so charming that no one could stay mad at him for long. In the summer, they had visitors. Xavier's cousin from Denver came out with his family, a wife and 2 daughters close in age to Thomas and Margaret. The children got along famously, and the adults enjoyed the company and conversation. It was the first time Willa really felt like they were part of a larger family, connected to the world beyond their isolated valley. That autumn, Willa realized she was pregnant again. This time there was no surprise, just quiet joy. Xavier was delighted and the children were excited about the prospect of another sibling. "I hope it is a girl," Margaret announced. "I am outnumbered by boys." "You have me," Willa pointed out, amused. "You are a mama, not a sister," Margaret said seriously. "It is different." The second pregnancy was harder than the first, perhaps because Willa was chasing after 4 children now while also managing the household. But Xavier and the ranch hands helped as much as they could, and Sarah Morrison became a regular visitor, often coming over to lend a hand or just keep Willa company. In early March, during a late winter snowstorm, Willa gave birth to a daughter. She came into the world screaming her displeasure at the cold, and she had Willa's red-gold hair and Xavier's blue-green eyes. "Margaret gets her wish," Xavier said, cradling his newborn daughter. "What should we call her?" They named her Rose Catherine, Rose for the wildflowers that bloomed on the ranch every summer, and Catherine for Willa's mother. Margaret was absolutely enchanted with her baby sister and spent hours just watching her sleep. Life on the ranch continued its pleasant rhythm. The children grew and thrived. Thomas, at 10, was tall and lanky with Xavier's dark hair and Willa's hazel eyes. He was quiet and thoughtful, happiest when he was working alongside his father. Margaret at 8 was all sunshine and chatter, always singing or telling stories. James at 5 was still mischievous, but starting to channel that energy into more productive pursuits, like helping in the barn. Henry at 2 was a sturdy little boy who adored his baby sister. and Rose, still an infant, was the darling of the family. One evening in late summer, when all the children were finally in bed, Willa and Xavier sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together after the chaos of the day. "You ever think about where we would be if we had not met?" Xavier asked. Willa considered this. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think the children and I would have ended up in some charity home, or maybe I would have remarried someone awful just to have a roof over our heads. I try not to dwell on it too much. It frightens me to think how close we came to disaster." "I think about it too," Xavier said. "I think about how empty my life was before you. I had the ranch, I had my work, but I did not have a reason to come home at the end of the day. Now I have so many reasons I cannot count them all." "5 children will do that," Willa said with a laugh. "5 wonderful children," Xavier corrected. "And 1 incredible wife." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling utterly content. They had built something beautiful here, something that had started with desperation and kindness, and had grown into a love deeper than Willa had ever imagined possible. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and growth. Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking on more and more responsibility on the ranch. By the time he was 16, he was managing the cattle alongside his father and the ranch hands, and Xavier often said he could not run the place without him. Margaret at 14 had grown into a lovely girl with her mother's practical nature and her father's sense of humor. She had started teaching the younger children their lessons, discovering that she had a gift for instruction. James at 11 was finally settling down, channeling his energy into learning everything he could about horses. He had a way with the animals that was almost magical, and Xavier was already talking about letting him start breaking and training the younger horses. Henry at 8 was quiet and bookish, more interested in the account books and the business side of ranching than the physical labor. Xavier said he was going to be the one who kept them all organized. And Rose at 6 was a little firecracker, fearless and fierce, always trying to keep up with her older brothers. In the winter when Thomas was 17, Xavier came down with a terrible fever. It started as a simple cold but quickly developed into something more serious, leaving him bedridden and delirious. Willa nursed him around the clock, terrified that she was going to lose him. The children tiptoed around the house, their usual exuberance dimmed by fear. Thomas stepped up during this time, managing the ranch with a maturity beyond his years. Margaret helped her mother with the nursing, and the younger children did their best to stay out of the way and be helpful where they could. For 2 weeks, Xavier's life hung in the balance. Dr. Patterson came out to the ranch twice, and both times he told Willa to prepare for the worst. But Willa refused to give up. She prayed and she cried and she sat by Xavier's bedside, holding his hand and talking to him even when he could not respond. And then, on the 15th day, the fever broke. Xavier opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. "Willa," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I am here," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I am right here, my love. The children, they are all fine. We are all fine. You are going to be fine too." Xavier's recovery was slow. It took weeks before he had the strength to get out of bed, and months before he was back to his full strength. But by spring, he was once again working alongside Thomas and the ranch hands, and life returned to normal. The incident had shaken everyone, a reminder of how fragile life could be. But it had also shown the strength of their family, the way they could pull together in a crisis. Thomas had proven himself capable of managing the ranch. Margaret had shown that she had her mother's steel core beneath her sunny exterior. And all the children had demonstrated their love and care for the man who had chosen to be their father. As the children continued to grow, Xavier and Willa found themselves talking more about the future. Thomas was getting to the age where he needed to decide if he wanted to stay on the ranch or strike out on his own. He had been courting a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman named Emily, who was the daughter of the blacksmith, and it seemed likely they would marry soon. "We should think about adding on to the house," Xavier said one night. "If Thomas marries Emily and they stay on the ranch, they will need their own space. And we have 5 children who are all growing up. We are going to need more room." "You just want an excuse to build something," Willa teased, but she agreed with him. The house that had seemed so enormous when she first arrived now felt crowded with 7 people living in it. They spent that summer adding a new wing to the house, with 3 additional bedrooms and another washroom. Xavier worked alongside the carpenters, and Thomas and James helped when they could. By the time autumn arrived, the addition was complete, and the house was bigger and better than ever. Thomas and Emily married in October, in a ceremony that reminded Willa of her own wedding to Xavier all those years ago. Except this time, she was the mother of the groom, watching her oldest boy become a man. Emily moved into the ranch, taking one of the new bedrooms, and she fit into their family as seamlessly as if she had always been there. The following spring, Emily gave birth to a son, making Willa and Xavier grandparents for the first time. They named him Robert Thomas, honoring both his grandfather and his father, and Willa felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both bittersweet and beautiful. Margaret at 18 decided she wanted to be a teacher, like her mother had been. Xavier and Willa arranged for her to attend a teacher's college in Denver, and though it was hard to let her go, they were proud of her determination and ambition. She came home for summers and holidays, full of stories about her studies and her new friends. James at 15 was now in charge of the horse breeding program he had convinced Xavier to start. He had a gift with the animals, and the Lazy E horses were becoming known throughout the region for their quality and temperament. Xavier often joked that James was going to make them all rich with his horses. Henry at 12 had indeed become the ranch bookkeeper, meticulously tracking expenses and income with a precision that made Xavier shake his head in wonder. "That boy has a gift," he would say. "He knows where every penny goes." And Rose at 10 was still trying to do everything her brothers did, much to their exasperation and Xavier's amusement. She could ride as well as any of them, rope a calf when needed, and was not afraid of hard work. But she also had a gentle side, often found reading to her little nephew or helping her mother in the garden. One evening in late summer, when the house was finally quiet, Willa and Xavier sat on the porch in their usual spot. They were older now, with silver threading through their hair and lines on their faces that had not been there when they first met, but the love between them had only deepened with time. "You remember that first day?" Willa asked. "When you found us outside the general store?" "I remember thinking that you looked like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," Xavier said. "But you held your head high anyway. I admired that." "I remember thinking you were either crazy or a saint to offer help to a complete stranger," Willa said, smiling. "Maybe I was a little of both," Xavier admitted. "But mostly, I was just a lonely man who saw a chance to do something good. I never imagined it would turn into this. A life full of children and grandchildren, a thriving ranch, a love that still takes my breath away." "When you said your ranch needed a family like ours," Willa said softly, "I think you were right. But I do not think you realized that we needed you just as much. You gave us more than a home, Xavier. You gave us a future. You gave us love. You gave me everything," Xavier said, pulling her close. You turned a house into a home. You filled my life with laughter and chaos and joy. Every single day with you has been a gift." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one over the mountains. The ranch stretched out around them, peaceful in the gathering darkness. Inside the house, they could hear the muffled sounds of their family, Thomas and Emily putting their son to bed, James playing his harmonica in his room, Henry reading aloud to Rose. 20 years had passed since that desperate day in Telluride, when Willa had been evicted with nothing but 3 children and her determination to survive. 20 years of hard work and laughter, of struggles and triumphs, of building a life together from nothing. The ranch had prospered beyond anything Willa had imagined that first day. The herd had grown to over 500 head, and the horse breeding program brought in significant income. They had added more outbuildings, expanded the barn, bought additional acreage. Xavier employed 4 ranch hands now, and there was talk of Thomas eventually taking over full management of the cattle operation while James focused on the horses. But more than the physical prosperity, the family had grown and flourished. Thomas and Emily were talking about having another baby. Margaret had graduated from college and accepted a teaching position in Telluride, where she would start in the fall. She was courting a young lawyer in town, and Willa suspected there would be another wedding before too long. James, at 19, was becoming known throughout Colorado for his skill with horses, and he had already had several offers to work for larger operations, though he insisted he was happy at the Lazy E. Henry, at 16, was already helping Xavier make business decisions, his sharp mind for numbers invaluable. And Rose, at 14, though still young, was showing signs of having inherited her mother's fierce determination and her father's kind heart. As autumn came and the aspen trees turned gold on the mountainsides, Willa found herself reflecting on how far they had all come. There were days when she still could not quite believe this was her life, that she had been so blessed after coming so close to losing everything. One morning she was making breakfast when Xavier came in from the barn, his face worried. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing is wrong exactly," Xavier said, "but Thomas and I have been talking. The ranch is getting too big for us to manage efficiently, even with the extra hands. We need to make some decisions about the future." They sat down at the kitchen table, and Xavier laid out the situation. The ranch was successful, but they were at a point where they needed to either scale back or expand significantly. If they expanded, they would need more help, more infrastructure, more investment. If they scaled back, they would be more comfortable but would be leaving potential income on the table. "What do you think we should do?" Willa asked. "I think we should ask the children," Xavier said. "This ranch is not just mine anymore. It is all of ours. Thomas and Emily and their son, they have a stake in this. James and his horse program, Henry and his head for business. Even Margaret and Rose, they are part of this family and this ranch. We should decide together." That evening they called a family meeting. Everyone gathered in the parlor, even little Robert, who sat on Emily's lap and played with his toes. Xavier explained the situation, laying out the options clearly. "I want to know what you all think," he said. "This ranch is your legacy as much as it is mine. Whatever we decide together." Thomas spoke first. "I think we should expand. We have the opportunity to make the Lazy E one of the premier ranches in Colorado. It would be hard work, but we have never been afraid of that." James agreed. "The horse breeding program alone could support a significant expansion. I have more orders than I can fill right now." Henry, always practical, said, "We would need to take out loans for the initial investment, but I have run the numbers. If we are careful, we could pay them off within 5 years and still turn a profit." Margaret, home for the weekend, added, I may not be here full-time, but I am still part of this family. I think you should do what makes you happy. But if you want my opinion, I agree with Thomas. Expand. Make this ranch something extraordinary. Rose, the youngest, simply said, I think whatever Mama and Papa decide will be right. Willa looked around at her family, at these children who had grown into such remarkable people. Then she looked at Xavier, and she saw the excitement in his eyes, the same spark that had been there when he first started talking about expanding the herd all those years ago. I think we should do it, she said. I think we should expand. Xavier, you have been so conservative over the years, always playing it safe to make sure we were secure. But we are secure now. We have built something solid. It is time to dream bigger. Xavier smiled, that smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. Then it is settled. We expand. The next few years were a whirlwind of activity. They bought additional land, expanding the ranch to over 3,000 acres. They built a new, larger barn and additional corrals. They hired more ranch hands and built another bunkhouse to house them. The herd grew to over 1,000 head, and James's horse breeding program became nationally recognized. It was hard work, harder than anything they had done before. There were times when Willa wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew. But they worked together, the whole family pitching in, and slowly but surely the expansion paid off. Margaret married her lawyer, a good man named Daniel, and they settled in Telluride. She continued teaching, and within a year she gave birth to twin daughters. Henry, at 20, took over full management of the ranch finances and proved to have a gift for investment. He took their profits and invested wisely, diversifying their income beyond just cattle and horses. James, at 23, was offered a job at a prestigious breeding operation in Kentucky, but he turned it down, insisting that the Lazy E was his home. And Rose, at 18, was showing every sign of being just as capable a ranch manager as her older brothers. Thomas and Emily had 2 more children, giving Willa and Xavier 3 grandchildren from them alone. The house rang with children's laughter again, a new generation growing up under the same roof that had sheltered their parents. One evening in the spring, when Willa was 52 and Xavier was 59, they took their usual seats on the porch and watched the sunset. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and beautiful, a testament to years of hard work and love. "We did it," Xavier said quietly. "We really did it." "Did what?" Willa asked, though she knew. "Built something that will last, built a legacy. Our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will grow up on this land. The Lazy E will be here long after we are gone." "That is a comforting thought," Willa said. "Though I am in no hurry to be gone, I plan to stick around and be a meddlesome old woman for many years yet." Xavier laughed and pulled her close. "Good. I would not have it any other way." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Xavier said, "Do you ever regret it?" "Marrying me, I mean. Taking on this life." Willa turned to look at him, surprised. "Not for a single moment. Xavier, you gave me and my children a home when we had nothing. You loved us when we were unlovable. You built a family with us. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just want to make sure you have been happy," Xavier said. "You gave up a lot when you came here, a life in town, neighbors, society." "I gave up nothing," Willa said firmly. "I gained everything. Xavier, I have been happier in this isolated valley with you than I ever was anywhere else. You are my home. You always have been from that very first day." Xavier kissed her, and after more than 20 years of marriage, it still felt like the first time, still made her heart race and her breath catch. As the years continued to pass, Willa and Xavier settled into the comfortable rhythm of older age. They left more and more of the ranch management to their children. Though Xavier still insisted on riding out to check the cattle every morning, and Willa still ruled the kitchen with a firm but loving hand. Margaret and Daniel had 4 children now, all of them frequent visitors to the ranch. Henry married a schoolteacher from Denver and brought her home to live on the ranch, building them a small house on the property. James finally married at 28, choosing a girl from town who loved horses as much as he did. And Rose, strong-minded Rose, announced at 21 that she was going to start her own ranch on a piece of property Xavier deeded to her, making her one of the few female ranch owners in Colorado. "She is just like her mother," Xavier said proudly when Rose told them her plans. "Determined to make her own way in the world. She is better than I ever was," Willa said. "She has opportunities I never dreamed of." Thomas and Emily eventually took over full management of the cattle operation, and they proved to be just as capable as Xavier had been. The ranch continued to prosper, and the Easton name became well known and respected throughout Colorado. On Willa's 60th birthday, the whole family gathered for a celebration. All 5 of her children were there with their spouses and children, and the house was full of noise and chaos and love. As Willa looked around at the crowded table, at the 3 generations gathered to celebrate with her, she felt overwhelmed by gratitude. After dinner, Xavier stood up and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, waiting for everyone to quiet down. 60 years ago, a remarkable woman was born. I did not meet her until she was 32, but from the moment I saw her sitting outside that general store in Telluride with her 3 children and all her worldly possessions in 2 bags, I knew my life was about to change. There was laughter around the table, and Willa felt tears prick her eyes. "Willa Easton, you have given me 28 years of happiness. You have given me children and grandchildren and a home full of love. You have made me a better man than I ever thought I could be. And I want everyone here to know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made." "To Willa, the love of my life." "To Willa," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Willa stood up, her throat tight with emotion. "I am not good at speeches," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I want you all to know that every day I wake up and thank God for this family. Xavier, you saved us when we had nothing. You gave us not just a home, but a future. And all of you children, you have grown into such wonderful people. I am so proud of each and every one of you." She sat back down, and Xavier took her hand under the table, squeezing it gently. Around them, their family laughed and talked and celebrated, and Willa knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfection, but this messy, noisy, chaotic love. As the evening wound down and the grandchildren started to fall asleep in various corners of the house, Thomas came to find his parents. "Mama, Papa, I have something to tell you," he said. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. "What is it, son?" Xavier asked. "Emily and I have been talking, and we want to rename the ranch. It has always been the Lazy E, named for the Easton family, but we think it should be the Easton Zimmerman Ranch now, to honor both sides of our family, to honor Mama and where we came from." Willa felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thomas, you do not have to do that." "Yes, we do," Thomas said firmly. "Mama, you have never asked for anything, you have never demanded recognition or credit, but the truth is this ranch would not be what it is without you. You were the one who turned a house into a home. You were the one who held us all together when times were hard. You deserve to have your name on the sign at the gate." Xavier was nodding. "Your son is right. I should have thought of it years ago." "I think it is a wonderful idea," Willa said, wiping her eyes. "The Easton Zimmerman Ranch. It has a nice ring to it." The sign went up the following month, and Willa stood at the gate with Xavier and all their children and grandchildren, looking up at the new name. The Easton Zimmerman Ranch. A symbol of 2 families joined together, of love that had overcome hardship and desperation to build something lasting. The years continued their gentle march. Willa and Xavier celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. Their grandchildren grew and started having children of their own, making them great-grandparents. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, though Xavier still rode out most mornings, just to check on things. On a warm evening in late August, when Willa was 68 and Xavier was 75, they sat in their usual spot on the porch. Xavier had slowed down in recent years, his body finally showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. But his mind was still sharp, and his love for Willa had never dimmed. "I've been thinking," Xavier said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About what?" Willa asked. "About that first day. About how I almost did not say anything to you. I almost just walked past and minded my own business." "What made you stop?" Willa asked. She had never actually asked him this before. Xavier was quiet for a moment, remembering. "Your eyes," he said finally. "I saw your eyes and I saw the fear there, but I also saw the determination. You were not going to give up no matter what. And I thought to myself, that is a woman worth knowing. That is a woman who would make a good partner." "You could see all that from just a look?" Willa asked, amused. "I could," Xavier insisted. "And I was right, was I not? You have been the best partner I could have ever asked for." "We have been good for each other," Willa agreed. "I think we brought out the best in each other." "My ranch needed a family like yours," Xavier said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "But what I did not know then was that I needed a family like yours. I needed you." "I needed you too," Willa said. "More than I ever admitted, even to myself. You did not just give us a home, Xavier. You gave us a life." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of their family, Thomas and Emily's youngest grandchild laughing at something, the clatter of dishes as someone cleaned up after dinner, the murmur of conversation. "No regrets?" Xavier asked softly. "Not a single one," Willa said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The ranch that Xavier had built and that Willa had helped turn into a home would outlast them both. It would be passed down to their children and their children's children, a living legacy of what love and hard work could create. The story of how a desperate widow with 3 children met a lonely rancher on a dusty street in Telluride would become family legend, told and retold to each new generation. But that evening, as the stars began to come out one by one over the Colorado mountains, Willa and Xavier were not thinking about legacy or the future. They were simply sitting together, holding hands, grateful for every moment they had been given. From that first desperate day to this peaceful evening, from strangers to partners to lovers, from a makeshift family to a dynasty, they had built something beautiful together. And as the night settled over the Willa Zimmerman ranch, with all their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren safe under its roof, Willa knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better. A real life fully lived with all its joys and sorrows and triumphs. A love that had started with a simple offer of help and had grown into something that would echo through generations. Xavier squeezed her hand, and Willa squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they needed to say. They had found each other when both of them needed it most. They had built a life together from nothing. And they had loved each other fiercely and faithfully through every challenge and every joy. It was, Willa thought as she leaned her head on Xavier's shoulder, the most perfect love story she could have ever imagined. And the best part was that it was real, every moment of it, from that first meeting to this perfect evening. Their family was their legacy, but their love was their triumph. And as they sat together watching the stars come out over the ranch they had built together, Willa knew that no matter what the future held, they had already won everything that mattered.